So today I will be interviewing Dr. Misha Bogomaz. He is a psychologist who specializes in group counseling, who is a director of the Counseling Center at the University of North Florida. And this interview will be about 30 minutes. So if you guys are interested, hang tight and enjoy. Okay.
Hi.
Awesome. Well, welcome. I appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know it's election day, so it's probably maybe a little crazy for you. I know I have a really busy day. I'm involved in a lot of like the politics stuff on campus.
Oh, good.
So I go to all the meetings and stuff, and
Mhm.
oh my goodness, we've been so busy.
It's good to be involved.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I guess I'll give you the opportunity to start off with a little bit of your background and what kind of education you started out with, maybe what you wrote your dissertations on, and how that's shifted maybe your focus in counseling in general, maybe to now what you do for group counseling at the university.
Well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. So my name is Dr. Misha Bogomaz. Misha is fine. I've been a psychologist for about 12 years now. It's hard to say that I'm a mid-career right now. I'm so used to saying an early career. I graduated in 2012. And my doctorate degree was in clinical psychology. And the reason why I chose it is because it opened up the most doors for me. For me, going into the field was really important to get something that will be useful in the long term. You never know how your interest is going to change in 5, 10, 15, and even 20 years. So I thought clinical psychology will open up the most doors, which it did. And my dissertation was on leadership. When it comes to dissertation, it's dissertation typically. We search for ourselves, and so the topic says a lot about ourselves. I think because you concentrate in it for so long, there has to have some kind of a personal meaning. And so for me, it was leadership. For me, I've always been interested in how we relate to our bosses, of how we relate to our informal bosses, such as professors, and how we relate to our original leaders in our life, which are our parents, and how that thread continues through our adult life whenever we ourselves start to become leaders in our field, at our jobs, we get promoted. And so for me, it was very important to become the kind of leader that people were willing to follow, not because of the fear, not because of the paycheck, but because they wanted to. And so I wanted to do some research on that. And that's how I actually got involved into group psychology as well. In undergraduate, it's hardly ever discussed. It's individual therapy brought up from time to time, but group therapy is not even on anyone's radar. But my school done a cool thing. All of the first year cohort, we spent 2 semesters in a group together on a weekly basis. And at first I was like, what the heck is this? I don't know, what am I supposed to do here? This is not even relevant, but I've learned so much about myself. I've learned so much about other people. And that's how my love for group counseling, group dynamics, and ourselves as just we're group people, we're social people. We're not meant to be alone on a desert island, no matter how much good stuff we have on a desert island. If we're alone, very soon we're going to start feeling lonely, right? No matter how successful we are in our career, if we don't have that to share with, I mean, we're going to be pretty sad.
Yeah, there was something interesting actually that you mentioned with, like you were talking about, like being in isolation, that type of thing. I was curious if, because that seems like from 2012 up until now, so you were
Mhm.
mid early career when the
Mhm.
pandemic happened.
Mhm.
How did that affect your interactions with like your research, maybe students that you've interacted with or faculty that you've interacted with over the course of the pandemic?
The pandemic, as unfortunate as it was, so many people lost their lives and so many people faced hardship. Where I'm sitting in my field, it made the technology use much more ever present. So before we were just starting to talk about telehealth and increase access to areas that might not have even mental health professional nearby. And COVID forced us to adapt much faster than I think we would have otherwise. And I know I worked for UNF Counseling Center and we worked remotely for a while. And if it wasn't for telehealth, it wouldn't be possible. It made us in psychology wrestle with this idea of, can we maintain a strong connection with somebody through screen?
Yeah.
Can we do good work? Or does the screen act as this barrier that, just cannot be divided, cannot be crossed over? I would say I'm very much convinced that it's a fantastic thing. It's not only it increases the reach of mental health professionals such as myself, it offers so much more convenience. So, for instance, in a private practice world, you would have to drive to your therapist's office. You have to drive back. You have to sit in the lobby awkwardly with other people. But these days, you have an option of just being in the privacy of your home, open the laptop, and that's it. You're right there. You're right there with your therapist. And the connection that I feel with my clients and the clients feel with me, it's pretty amazing that there is a lot of work that we can do. And there's so much of our life is online these days. And so to connect with another human being online, we do it on a daily basis.
Yeah, I've noticed trends even in within like psychiatry and
Mhm.
therapists and counseling types of things, because you can even do like group counseling over Zoom now,
Yes,
um,
yes.
where
Uh-huh.
people do like team building exercises. But
Mhm.
you even have now professionals who are able to treat clients, I think, at a much higher rate out of state and things like that.
Mhm.
So that increases their range of treatment
Mhm.
services. Maybe you try out a therapist here and you don't like
Mhm.
them and you're thinking, oh, there's so many limited resources and I work
Mhm.
from home now and I can't take time to leave my office and go out. I can just have a therapy session on Zoom, and come
Definitely.
back from my lunch break and I can get right back
Yeah.
to work. I think it's also incorporated therapy and the focus on mental health more so into people's daily lives, where it's become a routine. Like people put it on their schedule now. They're like, oh, I have to complete this project this morning. And on my lunch break, I go to therapy. And then after that, I go back to my day. So I've kind of had that mental health break from the stress of everything that's going on, even post pandemic. What kind of attitudes do you see from people, client wise, as far as towards using technology or Zoom calls or things like that for counseling?
Originally, there could be some hesitation in terms of, hey, let's meet online because they expect the conversation to be very surface level. They expect the connection itself to be felt very limited, but that's not the case. That's one group. And another group of people, they're like, oh, yes, I already spent so much time online. I know I can connect. I know this is doable for me, and this gives me so much flexibility. And I think that's what people really long for. They want to see their therapist based on their own schedule. And it's kind of like you mentioned, when somebody already has a really busy schedule, it's impossible to drive to your therapist's office and then drive home. It's so much easier to dedicate an hour somewhere, open up your laptop if it's in a private and confidential space, and you're right there.
Yeah. That was definitely something. And I even noticed after a while, professionals opening up their availabilities for weekend or going, hey, I won't be in the office, but I'll be on Zoom on Saturday. So if you
Mhm.
really can't make it in, we can have a Zoom call and I'll set it up outside of my normal hours. And I think that's been really helpful. Obviously, there's a benefit to the clinician because they're getting an extra day in on their schedule. I think that's been really cool and interesting to see how that's evolved over time. What kind of mental health effects do you think, obviously, other than isolation, possibly, or maybe you want to delve deep into that after, during pandemic and post pandemic?
The pandemic made people feel more isolated, more lonely, and just interpersonal skills, I feel like it went down.
Yeah.
And people who got stuck, especially by themselves, I think they had a lot of problems. And now that, companies and just life, hey, you have to come back, you have to reconnect, it's much harder for them because interpersonal skills, it's not something that we are born with. It's something that has to be continuously practiced. So let's say you are in a scenario in which you live by yourself and you work from home, right? There could be days at times that you don't see another human being in person unless you're very intentionally seek out those connections. And during the pandemic, A lot of things were closed. And frankly, it's very easy to be like, well, I'll see this person tomorrow. I'll see this person next week. And then tomorrow becomes the following day and the following day and the following day. And that's not good. We
Yeah.
have to maintain our skill level. It's not going to improve on its own.
Because that can also be something that's not productive towards your development, like in leadership, like how you mentioned, or teamwork. People,
Mhm.
I think, probably lack the ability to engage in teamwork efforts and build those like connections. I guess going back to your history with your education, what kind of things did you particularly study, or what was your experience?
I'm a practitioner. So in psychology, there is researchers who do a little bit of practice, and then there's practitioners who do very little to no research.
Yeah.
So for me, I was one of those people when I done my dissertation, I was like, you know what? Never again. And of course, I collaborated on a couple of projects
Yeah.
here and there. But for me, it's really doing the work that has been the most meaningful. For me, there is nothing like sitting across a client who I would have never met otherwise because our life is just so differently. Listen to their story, look at the world through their lenses, and see how they view the world, how they view current events, how they view their life. And it also makes me reflect on myself a lot
Yeah.
and grow a lot. So as much as a psychologist who does a lot of therapy, I do say like, yes, I am there to help the client, but I love that kind of a relationship that develops with my clients because it helps me to grow. It helps me become a bigger human being,
Yeah.
better human being. When it comes to research, some people, they are really good at concentrating on a small topic for months at a time. And I would rather read the
Yeah.
research than I'm really doing the research and then publishing it. If I'm part of the team, absolutely. But on my own, not my
Yeah.
thing. Not my thing. And that's,
That's
that's a
refreshing.
wonderful thing about our field is that whatever you're into, there is probably a place for you. If you just want to do therapy, there is a place for you. If you want to be more of an administrative side, please come to our field. If you simply just want to do research, there is plenty of opportunities like that.
Absolutely. I think there's that great balance, especially within the field of psychology. And I've noticed this obviously, like healthcare fields do this type of thing too, where there's researchers and obviously their work is important. They publish papers and they're doing, finding out maybe what new methods work in this type of work. And then there's the applied side of it, where you're
Mhm.
working one on one with the people using the research that you've used prior. So it's like kind of this collaborative
Mhm.
thing. So even if you don't particularly do research, there's other people doing that and passing that information along. And you said that you keep up with reading.
And
That
that's
kind of
the
stuff.
ideal piece because what you're
Yeah.
describing is the collaboration, which I think we all should strive for. But what I've noticed is sometimes there can be this fault lines of like practitioners like me, which is like, I've been doing this for a number of years. I don't need to do any more reading. Or researchers, they do research on in whatever it is, and then they don't follow through. Like, well, what's the application of it? I
Yeah.
mean, I've been through so many presentations by a really good researcher and walking away with like, but what's the
What do
like,
we do?
yeah, what do I do as a practitioner, right? Or somebody like me doing a presentation and there is a researcher in the audience like, well, but how does the, current research play into this thing that you're presenting on and the thing that you're doing? So ideally, we want to collaborate and I love to see more of it, but unfortunately, that's not really the case currently.
Something also important to note is that a lot of that maybe research and maybe the kinds of things that you do where you're interacting directly with either clients or just people on campus or people in your daily life just generally is that we've incorporated mental health practices and counseling into a lot of fields that didn't really typically have them before. I've noticed one of the biggest things is when you go and get a psych degree, even if it's just an associate's or a bachelor's, people in HR will hire you. Schools will hire you because they see that and they go, oh, that person has the type of experience where they learn to interact with others in productive ways and they're typically compassionate, or at least they should be. As you know, that's not always the case. And even on campuses we've started having counseling centers and things like that. Have you seen that have a positive impact on faculty and students and the people that you work with generally?
Absolutely. I think it's a huge mistake to go and become, I don't know, the best master of a content, let's say in biology, in mechanical engineering. You can you can really know that stuff, but if you have no interpersonal skills, if you have no very limited way to communicate empathically, tactfully, honestly, if you have very limited self-awareness, it really doesn't matter how much you know, you're not going to get far. What other people look for working with you, what company is looking for to work with, is somebody who is able to work together in a team, somebody who is able to work productively, somebody who will be able to push the team forward, somebody who is able to give a tactful feedback, with somebody who's able to receive it without being defensive. It's those
Yeah.
interpersonal skills that no matter where the technology is going to take us, as is going to be crucial because we're human beings and human beings are interpersonal.
I think that was one of the things that drew me towards a psychology degree in general, and I'll be starting work in sociology. But is the practical application that it has within every aspect of life, and I think that's why it draws so many people in education and employers and all that to people who have that type of background. What kinds of work now do you do with group counseling? What types of approaches are you more familiar with, or do you even prefer familiar with the certain things like CBT or DBT and how those things are applied individually? But like you said, they don't typically talk about things in group counseling. And I've noticed in your intro class that there was a pretty heavy focus on group counseling that I never saw
Mhm.
before. And I really was intrigued by that. So, are you partial to any approach to group counseling? Obviously, everyone's different, but
I'm very partial to group counseling simply because if I put somebody in a group, they are going to act like they do in real life
yeah,
very soon once their anxiety goes down. And if they come to me for any kind of ailments, for any kind of problems, that problem is going to come out in a group and we will be able to address it in a much more effective way. So for instance, when somebody comes to see me one-on-one, I have to rely on their story, which is it's not that they're lying to me, it's not that it's
yeah,
not true, it's just it's their version of how they operate in the world. And I
yeah,
have to rely on that version. But if I put them in a group, then whatever kind of difficulty comes up with, it very much parallels real life. So a group is like a laboratory. It's a microcosm of how we go through life. So if you have any kind of interpersonal things, it's going to come out. If you have anxiety, it's going to come out. If you have some kind of awkwardness, it's going to come out.
yeah.
And we're able to address it right there from multiple angles, from multiple perspectives. So that's why I'm a huge, huge proponent of group counseling. And in terms of approaches, you
Mhm.
know, CBT, DBT is all of the rage, and
Yeah.
there is there is a reason why it's a gold standard. There is a lot of good thing to say about it. There is a lot of research that backs it up, and I mean, it's been said enough about it, so I don't want to say more about it. I think the
Yeah.
challenges to it is there is so much more than CBT or in CBT like approaches. One of the reasons why there's so much research out there about it is because it's easier to do research, right? Automatic negative thoughts, it's easy to quantify. On
Yeah.
the other hand, with psychodynamic stuff, for instance, you know, going back to Freud and the modern approaches of it is how do you define unconsciousness? How do you measure it? Right? How do you measure defense mechanisms? The research is actually out there and it's pretty solid, but it's much harder. And that's why I don't think it's as popular. What I do notice in the field is that when it comes to higher ed, when it comes to the professors, they're much more CBT. But in the field, there is a lot greater variety, and I would love to see that variety being integrated more into the psychology departments. There is a Carl Rogers approach, there is an
Yeah.
interpersonal approach, there is modern psychoanalytic approaches, and they're all really fantastic. I would hate for any student to just think like, well, CBT, that's the only choice and that's the end of the game. It's
Yeah.
really not. It's one of the solid theories, but it's not the only one.
I'm definitely more partial
Hmm.
to things like CBT, and that's probably been influenced by a lot of the courses that I've been in. And you mentioned something interesting, actually, that I've been talking about recently. You said, "Oh, it's actually difficult to, quantify or really define things like subconsciousness." I was speaking to somebody who's really big into philosophy, specifically about that. They were like,
Hmm.
"I don't understand what that means. I don't know what it means to process something in the background."
Hmm.
And with my limited ability to explain, that was a little bit difficult. Is there something that you wish people could know about psychodynamic therapy and know about the benefits versus, some just people relying on things like CBT and DBT?
I think people buy into much more psychodynamic theories than they realize. So for instance, going back to Freud of meeting regularly with clients, that's him, right? Not recognizing something that's obvious to everyone else because you don't want to see it.
Yeah.
That goes back to psychodynamic theory. Not wanting to know something, not connecting the two and two, that goes back to psychodynamic theory. And just the thought of us having a rich internal life that makes as much impact on what we do than any kind of an outside stimulus. It's classic as psychodynamic thought would be. And if we go with, let's say, an interpersonal approach, in interpersonal theories say that like our relationships with other people matter. That you can have the best mood possible. You can walk up and be like, man, this is going to be a fantastic day. You go and you spend some time with your friend who is sad. You're going to walk away from that person kind of feeling sad as well. And that's a wonderful example of how other people, they impact us. It's not just the way that we perceive information, automatic negative thoughts. It's not about only our unconscious mental life. It's also about real other people.
It seems like psychodynamic approaches or interpersonal approaches tend to focus on the person more holistically. Whereas when
Mhm.
you have something like CBT, it's very much like emotion, thought, behavior. Let's
Mhm.
change the behavior because,
Mhm.
we're going to change the emotion or something like that. And it's very like that straightforward, rigid. And even in clinical practice, they have I believe it's a 6 month goal with CBT and how that works with insurances and ICD codings, which I think is very interesting, more so with that contrast with psychodynamic approaches or interpersonal or group approaches, where it's not strict. It's let's focus on these issues until they're solved, until you learn coping mechanisms or learn interpersonal skills. And I think that's a benefit. And I hope one day that CBT approaches also kind of lean towards that a lot because I think you maybe don't benefit a client when they come in, they have an issue, and then you go, all right, well, we're going to get this done in 6 months or, whatever the time limit is.
I think a good CBT practitioner will make it work. I think it's only when you're so very rigid, that's when that's when you stumble as a therapist. And I think you mentioned this idea of, coming to therapy when there is only an issue. I actually think that dentist has done a fantastic job in brainwashing us into go and do a professional cleaning twice a year, right? I don't know whether it's true or not. I'm going to assume it's true because I buy into all of that. But I think our world would be, gosh, in a such better place if we do the same thing for our mental health. Let's say for our mental health, like the insurance covers, hey, go talk to your therapist twice a year. Just go have a session. You don't have to have any kind of problems. You don't have to have an issue. Do a check-in,
Yeah.
see what comes up. I think we would be so much more empathic as a society. We would be able to catch so many more issues psychologically if we adopt that kind of an approach.
More so that kind of proactive health
Hmm.
instead of the reactive health of like,
Yes.
okay, now I've hit rock bottom. Now it's time to go to
Hmm.
therapy because I'm
Hmm.
struggling so much. And I think we've talked about this before, where especially people with things like personality disorders, they don't think about going to therapy until it's their life is in shambles, a total mess in their marriage, and it's too late to kind of resolve those things. So I think that is really interesting that you mentioned it, where it's a more proactive, consistent approach.
We try everything else, and then only when we hit a certain stage, we're like, okay, fine, I'll go see a therapist. Fine. sometimes it's a little bit too late. Like you mentioned, marriage therapy, right? They tried everything else, but and they finally go, okay, let's do couples therapy. But there is so much water under the bridge that marriage therapy becomes divorce therapy, really.
You probably can't ever have a conversation about marriage therapy unless you've read John Gottman
Uh-huh.
and Joe Gottman's
Yeah.
work. And I
Mhm.
think the work is incredible there. And I think it gives actually a sort of credibility towards the field of psychology. I tend to notice this thing in society and interacting with people where they go, oh, well, psychology is just a pseudoscience. These soft
Mhm.
sciences aren't real sciences.
Mhm.
Going to a therapist is just talking to a friend. You're just
Mhm.
paying someone to be a friend or something like that. And I think that type of work is really important. And I've shown people, I'm like, they have graphs of like when you interact with your partner this way or your wife or something this way, there's literally a graph of like how the conversation's predicted to go. And they do that kind of thing and do the really important empirical work. What do you think that you've seen people's perspectives generally towards the validity of the field of psychology and counseling in general?
I think people who are skeptical, they, their arm gets twisted a little bit to come in, be it an ultimatum from their partner, be it an ultimatum from their parents, or somehow they ended up in a chair across from me. Sometimes they come in for a couple of sessions and they're like, nope, never again. I'm not
Yeah.
coming back. The thing is, if a person is not ready to make any kind of changes, there is this stages of change, and if they're in this pre-contemplative stage, um, they need to have more lived experience to consider more changes, because no matter what I say as a therapist, they're not ready to hear it. They will rationalize it away. They will focus on, well, I'm strong enough to handle it. And I'm like, but why do you need to be strong enough to handle it?
Yeah.
To make it better, right? But some people, they experience this relief after a few sessions, like, oh my gosh, I'm talking about it, things are actually moving, and they continue to stay.
Yeah.
You never know
Yeah.
how it's going to go.
Yeah, I'm hoping going forward in the future that people will become more open to the field of psychology. And that's really something that is part of the goal here because I know there is people, I mean, I've talked to people who are like, I want to go to college and I want to help people, but I don't really know what I want to do because I don't know anything about psychology and I don't know anything about the healthcare field, but I know I want to help people. And that's one of the things I've talked to people about. I'm like, go join the psychology club. We have a psychology club, we have a child psych club. Just go see what it's about. You don't have to get involved. You don't have to go to every meeting. There's no obligation. You can go and just see what it's about. And I think that, like I said, that's part of this project that I want to do is really like show people, look, there are professionals in these fields and they're happy to share information. They're happy to share their experiences. And I think that kind of legitimizes the field maybe in some way that people have tended to discredit in the past. You have real professionals who can say, I've seen this, I've done this work. It's it's really helped improve people's lives. And it's just as important as things, like the STEM field, which gets compared to, social sciences a lot. They're like, this is more rigid and it's more important and more valuable because it's numbers and very, blunt facts and things like that. But I think over time, people will, especially like we talked about after the pandemic, become more open to the idea of psychology being more legitimized.
I think what you're bringing up, this really crucial idea of, going to see a therapist, doing some kind of work in psychology, not because you're struggling, but because you're more curious about yourself. You want to find out more about yourself. You want to grow. And that is a fantastic reason to do all of the things that you've mentioned, right? We grow from doing things. It's like we have an experience and then we reflect on it. We experience and we reflect on it. And so we get to find out more stuff about ourselves that somebody who might not know what they're interested in, all of a sudden, like, huh, that's an interesting thread to follow. I didn't think I'm gonna like this as much as I did, but I'm kind of enjoyed it. So I'm gonna go attend another meeting and then meet more people, and who knows where it's gonna take you. But the point is to continue to seek out experiences. and reflect on those. And it's great to meditate by yourself on the experience. And I use meditation and it's kind of like loosely in terms of like think about your experience, but it's great to think and meditate on the experience with another human being. Yeah, they might ask you some questions that you might not even be aware of to ask
Yeah.
yourself.
You can only introspect so much on your
Mhm.
own. You can't properly just, think of ideas or think about yourself without having other people to confirm or maybe counter the ideas that you have about yourself. And that brings me to kind of second to last question, maybe last question, because I know I'm running out of time. Is that when it comes to, I really don't think people know a lot about themselves at all. I think we think that we do, but we don't really. But I was curious going forward, and we won't touch on
Mhm.
election politics, anything like that. I'm more concerned actually with the reactions of people to no matter what the outcome is. Do you expect to see more difficulty or maybe more uptick in people coming to group counseling or maybe having issues with other people after that? I'm assuming because I know, like I said, politics is extremely dividing and that can make it hard to work with other people just in your daily lives if you have such different views on things.
I can certainly see people coming for counseling, for a check-in or more long term, depending on who wins this election. We've seen that in 2020. We've seen that for, 8 years ago now. So I do suspect something like that. Um, and one of the things you mentioned is people believe they know themselves well, and I think they know certain parts of themselves really well. But when we go back to the, psychodynamic idea that we are really good at lying to ourselves, we're really
Yeah.
good at looking in the mirror and seeing ourselves in somewhat of a distorted way. It only takes, somebody to try to point out to you, to try to incorporate other aspects of yourself, right? One of the things that I do see happening is right is this great divide in our country, and we're focusing on, hey, those people are like that, but I'm like this. And what it does, it serves as a distancing behavior. Like all of the negative stuff is there, and all of the positive stuff is with me up here. And what happens is we start to lose this, like, well, wait, but how am I not living up to the standards that I set for myself? How am I, not living up to this image that I really want to aspire to be? And that's, I think, is a big problem. I think we really need somebody, be it a significant other, be it friend, be it, a group of friends, or be it, your therapist, to really look and see a part of ourselves that is not so hot, that
Yeah.
is not so good, and see how that part plays out in our life, because there is a shadow in all of us. There is that's a part of being a human being. We need others to help us keep that shadow in check. Stuff versus saying it's those people out there who are doing X, Y, and Z, but I would never.
I think it tends to also show us that we're more like the people that we try to divide ourselves between. I've spoken with Dr. Grant in the sociology program, and he's talked about like boundary work where people will, even if they're really similar to other people, will draw that line and say, no, I'm actually different. I'm not like them.
Yes.
They're bad in these XYZ ways.
Yes.
And I think we tend to be more similar to other people than we actually think that we are. But I do appreciate you meeting today. I think this was a really insightful conversation, and I really enjoyed learning things from you. If you have any last comments or where you see yourself going forward with group counseling in general, feel free.
Well, I appreciate being here, appreciate your questions, and there is a part of me that's like, well, I hope my answers made sense, and I hope that they
Yeah.
were useful to somebody, so I have that running commentary, in the back of my mind. But where I think, I'm gonna go, and where I think the field of psychology goes is, I think we should be doing kind of like what you're doing, is we should not be just focused on concentrating helping one person. We should be concentrating on, you know, work helping a group, helping the community, and be it
Mm.
advocacy, be it involvement, be it plugging in, advocating for the causes that we think are really crucial. It's not enough, to help one person if everything in that person's life has fallen apart. It's kind of like, if a good analogy would be if an individual fish is not doing well and another fish is not doing well, at some point we need to start worrying about the pond and
Yeah,
what can we do to make the pond more healthy so each individual fish is going to feel much better and is going to do better. And
yeah,
so we need to get out there and we need to do stuff that really is in accordance with our values and in accordance with the virtues that we aspire to promote.
yeah. Well, like I said, I appreciate your time.